Welcome to the JT Sports Podcast. If you live, eat, breathe, and sleep football, this is the right place for you. We're talking NFL, college football, 24/7, 365 days throughout the year. If you love the NFL and college football just as much as I do, this is the right place for you. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell icon so you don't miss when we drop new content. What's going on, everyone? Hope everybody's doing well on this Tuesday afternoon. We got some more firings happening in the NFL that we have to react to on this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. The Raiders have fired Antonio Pierce after only one season as the full-time head coach. And the Titans have made the most shocking firing up to this point, moving on from General Manager Ran Carthon after only 2 seasons with the organization. I want to discuss the Raiders' decision to fire Antonio Pierce first because there's a narrative floating around about this decision to fire him that I strongly disagree with, and that's he's another black head coach that wasn't given enough time and he was unfairly fired after 1 season, given the circumstances that he had coming into this year. And the reason why I disagree with that is because, for one, over the last decade, the NFL has had 11 one-and-done coaches. 5 of them have been black, and 6 of them have been white. So the Raiders' decision to move on from Antonio Pierce had nothing to do with race, because the main reason why he even got this job in the first place was because of the little amount of success that he had during his run as the interim head coach. Because remember, when he took over for Josh McDaniels, when he was fired early during the season, the Raiders were able to win a couple of games, including upsetting the Chiefs on Christmas Day. And they finished 8-9. He had the locker room rallying behind him. Max Crosby threatened to demand the trade if AP didn't get the full-time head coaching job. And remember, this isn't the first time that the Raiders had an interim head coach that was able to turn the season around and get the locker room rallied behind them, because in 2021, when John Gruden stepped down after those leaked emails came out, Rich Bisaccia took over as the head coach, and he turned the season around to the point where the Raiders came really close to beating the Cincinnati Bengals in a wild card round that year. And instead of giving Rich Bisaccia the full-time head coaching job, Mark Davis opted to hire Josh McDaniels instead. And I'm pretty sure if Mark Davis could have went back and redid that decision, knowing how bad Josh McDaniels was going to turn out to be, he probably would have given Rich Bisaccia that opportunity as the full-time head man. Because, I mean, Rich Bisaccia, not even being the head coach of the Raiders for a season, has had one of the most successful runs the Raiders have had in over a decade. So not making Rich Bisaccia the full-time head coach after his success as the interim, I felt played a big part in Antonio Pierce getting this head coaching opportunity. And why he's getting fired is because you also have to take into account that Tom Brady is now the minority owner. And Mark Davis is leaning on him heavily for his advice when it comes to these coaching staff decisions and who they should sign in free agency, who they should draft. Tom Brady's going to have a lot of input on decisions that the Raiders are going to be making over these next couple of months. And I doubt that Antonio Pierce would have been given a stamp of approval from Tom Brady, given how bad he's been this season when it comes to situational football. You see, when you look at the Raiders, from a record standpoint, it looks like they're a bad team. But I watched plenty of Raiders games this year where they were in one-possession games and they lost them due to either poor clock management from Antonio Pierce, being too conservative in fourth down situations, or they would just have too many self-inflicted errors. You would have weird special teams mishaps. Remember when they lost to Kansas City on that Black Friday game due to the botch exchange from the center and Aiden O'Connell? Those are an indictment on your coach. When you constantly find ways to lose games the way that the Raiders have, it shows you that you have an incompetent head coach. And Antonio Pierce didn't really have a lot of experience being a coach at this level anyway. So he was learning on the job, which also didn't help. He had Marvin Lewis on his staff as a mentor, somebody who kind of was also giving him a little bit of advice about how to go about things. But what really was the red flag for me with Antonio Pierce was when he made the decision to hire Luke Getsy as his offensive coordinator when they were unable to finalize that deal with Cliff Kingsbury because he got to offer more money to take the Commanders' OC job. And his logic behind hiring Luke Getsy, who is the dude that most Bears fans blame for Justin Fields not working out during his final season in Chicago, Antonio Pierce said, when we went against the Bears offense, they tore us up. And that was more of an indictment on Antonio Pierce defense not being good than it was Luke Getsy being some offensive guru, because a lot of Bears fans were happy that this dude got fired. His offense wasn't good. And for Antonio Pierce to hire him just was a really head-scratching decision for me. And then once we got to the middle way point of this season, Antonio Pierce cleaned house with his entire offensive staff, fired the offensive coordinator, the O-line coach, like pretty much everybody. Like Antonio Pierce, when you listen to him talk, he sounds like somebody that perfectly embodies what it means to be a Raider. You know, you definitely can tell that this dude loves the Raiders. He loved the organization. He bled the silver and black. But in terms of the product that we saw on the field from a coaching standpoint, it just wasn't good. And I doubt with Tom Brady spending so many years under Bill Belichick, who is probably the best coach in the history of this game when it came to properly managing situational football, knowing when to use your timeouts, knowing when to go for it, it probably made him cringe seeing all the games the Raiders lost due to the mishandling of those situations from Antonio Pierce. So I don't really get the outrage for Antonio Pierce being a one-and-done head coach because, I mean, Urban Meyer was one-and-done. Freddie Kitchens, who similarly, like Antonio Pierce, had some success as the interim head coach when he took over for Hugh Jackson in Cleveland, and then he got the full-time head coaching job, and he just flamed out. The NFL is a production-based business. If you are black, white, or orange, and you're a good coach, you're not going to get fired. Dan Campbell didn't get fired after his first season because there was a vision. Everybody understood that it was going to take more than 1 year to turn this thing around, but you still saw glimpses of the Lions being able to compete with some of the best with all of the losses that they had, although they came by one possession. You saw that team fight. You saw that team scrap and claw. You saw that team play hard under Dan Campbell. For the Raiders, yeah, they played hard, but some of those losses should have been wins. And that's why the decision to fire Antonio Pierce after 1 year is outrageous to me. I felt like it was one that was justified. Now, firing that is really controversial that was made today was the Tennessee Titans parting ways with general manager Ran Carthon after only 2 seasons serving in the role with this organization. And what makes this so controversial is that, for one, the owner picked Ran Carthon over Mike Vrabel last year. Mike Vrabel got fired because him and Ran Carthon, they couldn't coexist. You had 2 alphas, and when you have 2 guys with that strong of a personality, only one can stay because the other one won't be able to coexist because they gotta have that power. So with the power struggle that Ran Carthon and Mike Vrabel had, it forced the Tennessee Titans owner to have to pick one, and she went with Ran Carthon and decided to send Mike Vrabel packing. And Ran Carthon has been a mixed bag as a general manager for the Titans. Like, he's hit on a few draft picks. You know, this rookie class that the Titans have looks pretty promising. You got J.C. Latham. You got Brownlee, the cornerback that you drafted in the middle round. And then in 2023, you know, he had a few draft picks as well that worked out. Peter Skoronski is a pretty serviceable starter. And you also got Tajay Spears, who's a really good RB2. But he's also had a good amount of misses as well. And also, when you spend the most money in free agency and you still are the worst team in the weakest division in the NFL, arguably, you have a right to have some questions asked about you. And although Ran Carthon hired Brian Callahan, it's not like he gave Brian Callahan a lot to work with when you think about what he had at quarterback this year. He had Mason Rudolph and Will Levis. Will Levis was the ultimate wild card coming out of the 2023 NFL draft. That was already a pretty weak quarterback class with Bryce Young and CJ Stroud being the guys that everybody presumed were going to be solid starters, and they've looked like that up to this point. But outside of them, Anthony Richardson and Will Levis were pretty much in the same tier in terms of the floor was incredibly low, but the upside was incredibly high. And for Will Levis, getting him in the second round looked like a steal, but he was one of those guys that needed to sit for a year or two. He needed a lot of development because his mechanics were not that good, and he was just too reckless with the football. And the same mistakes that Will Levis made at Kentucky, he continues to make at the NFL level. And then you only have Mason Rudolph as your only backup option. So it's like Brian Callahan pretty much was coaching with his hands tied behind his back due to how incompetent the quarterbacks he was given were from Ran Carthon. And Ran Carthon, I like him. He's a well-spoken guy. He really cares about the players. The players like him because all the reactions from Titans players, they are really upset with this move. And I would be upset too if I was them because, when you have a guy that takes a shot on you and he helps you fulfill your lifelong dream, of course you're going to support him. And even I was a little shocked to see this move happen because you knew that this wasn't going to be an overnight rebuild. And the Titans owner, I'm not saying that women don't know anything about football because there are some women that know football just as much as me and you do. But it doesn't seem like she has a good grasp on understanding what it takes for an organization or a franchise to rebuild successfully. You can't expect to have a successful rebuild if you're canning your general manager before his third season. You got the first overall pick. And the Titans this year, if they had at least average quarterback play, they probably end up being a 7, maybe 9-win team. And maybe they could have competed for the AFC South title because the Texans weren't really that good. The Jags were trash. And same thing with the Colts. So if you had a guy like a Baker Mayfield or even a Jameis Winston, you would have been a way better team than what you were this season because your defense was great. It just was that Will Levis, when he's becoming Santa's helper nearly every single week, it's hard to win games when you just have a quarterback that just continues to make it hard to win. So for Brian Callahan, we don't really know how good of a coach he is until he gets his quarterback. And firing Ran Carthon doesn't make things any better for him because now you're going to have a new GM that's going to have Brian Callahan on a short leash. Because if the Titans don't win a lot of games this upcoming season in 2025, Brian Callahan could get canned only after his second season as the head coach for this organization. So it's like the Titans just right now, they're not going down a really good path. It looks like with them canning their GM, and most likely Brian Callahan probably going to get canned because the GM that they're going to bring in, he didn't hire Brian Callahan. So when you got a GM that has a head coach that he didn't hire, he's going to be on a shorter leash. And you got the number 1 overall pick. I would have trusted Ran Carthon more with that due to him hiring Brian Callahan because they got a vision of what they want this team to be. And now with you bringing in a general manager, he may have a different vision from how he feels this team should be compared to Brian Callahan, which leads to dysfunction. And now the Titans, they've gone from one of the more well-ran franchises in the NFL to now one of the worst-ran franchises in the NFL within the span of 3 years. You might as well have just kept Mike Vrabel and fired Ran Carthon after last year if this was what you were going to do. You feel me? So I don't really like this decision by Tennessee to fire Ran Carthon. I felt like with some of the draft picks that he hit on and some of the free agency moves that he made, the Titans were heading down the right direction because you had the number one overall pick. You get Shedeur or Cam Ward, and they end up panning out. Then, boom, you instantly are a playoff team in a division that is arguably the weakest in the NFL. So I really don't understand this decision to get rid of Ran Carthon, but I'm not mad at the Raiders for firing Antonio Pierce. But leave your thoughts on these firings in the comment section down below. Subscribe, hit that like button, turn on post notifications if you're new so you don't miss when we drop new content and when we go live. Check us out wherever you get your podcasts from, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. The links are down in the description down below. Give us a 5-star review if you enjoy, and I will see you guys shortly with another episode.